Welcome to the online class lecture of Professor S.K. Paul, HOD, University Department of English, R A Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear students of PG Semester 3, today I am going to deliver my lecture on Indian literary criticism and theory. Indian literary criticism and theory. While speaking on the present scenario, what one has to concentrate on is not tradition, sorry, tradition and the individual talent anymore, or whether one's poems are a spontaneous overflow of emotions recollected in tranquility, or not, but something much deeper, which is the philosophical question of what criticism should do today. Let me start this time by repeating something everybody knows. Literature is not something that came about only in one place or time, but is found emerging from many places and spaces at different points of time in mankind's checkered and varied history. Apart from maybe Egypt in Africa, Indian literature of the Arsha Bharata Shamaksharam variety is thus one of the oldest canons, if not the oldest, starting of course, traditionally speaking, with the Vedas. The earliest works that are meta literature and not just literature, and theoretical, while not exactly criticism, that can be applied to how we look at literature that we have to bother about, as commonly accepted as Kautilya's Arthashastra, that can be viewed primarily as a kind of parallel to Plato's Republic in an oblique sense, but the more accessible work that has left a deep imprint on literature per se, India, as a first text which is a meta or perspective meaning about literature, thus being and becoming influential as theory, though it was actually on drama, or more specifically on acting. Our Aristotle's poetics, again in an oblique way, is a Natya Shastra by Bharata. Arthashastra and Natya Shastra came earlier. The Rasa theory has cast its shadow over all of Indian literature from then on, and this is the shadow of Sanskrit and its aesthetics. In the south, we have had Dravidian aesthetics, which is connected to Tamil as a counterpart which deals with Tinai in all its ramifications. When we fast forward this tool a bit, we go past Sanskrit to regional languages like Hindi, Bengali, and Malayalam, and all our other major tongues other than Tamil, and also acknowledge that India has experienced Pali from Prakrit and influx from languages like Greek and Arabic, leading to Urdu and finally English, and the resultant admixtures as a backdrop has enriched and not enfeebled our literature, criticism and theory, unlike what people think. Madan Gandhi, a leading Indian critic, scholar, editor and philosopher in the Upanishadic tradition, who is also Cambridge returned, holding a copy of My Dazzling Birds by Kirti Sengupta, of whose 10 the present author is one. Some of the Major names in Indian literary theory and criticism in English, according to me, to go through them briefly, would be Aurobindo, with his The Future Poetry, in which he revives the idea of poetry as sound, the mantra, chant, invocation, and Michael Madhusudhan Dutt, who, like Dante, left Latin in an earlier time to write his Divine Comedy in vernacular, and nationalistic Italian left English to write his masterpiece of an epic poem, Meghnad Bad Kavya. Meghnad Bad Kavya. In Bangla, it is entitled as Meghnad Bad Kabbo. Meghnad Bad Kabbo in Bengali, but also gifted blank verse and the sonnet form to his mother tongue and India. Meanwhile, this brings us to the task of the critic in earnest, who, whether by writing on literature or not, brings in a kind of hybridization, crossovers, of which such internationalism that turns the tables on the invader. In this case, the British, British is one post-colonial sort. However, after such figures, what we see is a strange pall cast over Indian writing in English in the field of criticism and theory, whereby only those who are abroad or were abroad make a huge mark in the minds of Indians as capable critics, whether it is A.K. Ramanujam in his choices of who is translate or who to translate, or B. Rajan, the Milton scholar, or the later renowned ones like Gayatri Spivak of Can the Subaltern Speak fame, Homi Bhabha, Dartmouth, or Ranjit Guha, settled in Vienna. What is noteworthy is the same pattern: go abroad, publish against those abroad who appointed them, and make a name back in India, as if we have to wait for Western validation to accept great criticism, even if of the critiquing variety of Western models, or just the critical kind. These thinkers are not exactly like Aurobindo or M. Dutt, Michael Madhusudhan Dutt, or even Harish Trivedi or Ramchandra Guha, the latter three, who are to some extent more homegrown varieties, though also having a foreign experience. We have had a cartographer, cartologer, a mapper like K. Srinivas Iyengar, who did a gargantuan, Herculean, and mammoth job once upon a time in mapping Indian writing in English. But the truth is, very few Indians seem up to the task of matching their gigantic Western counterparts in the field of literary criticism and theory. Though we now do have significant thinkers coming up as worldview holders and ideologues like Vandana Shiva, Kancha Elia, Chandrabhan Prasad, etc. However, this is in ideology and is rather different from having critics of the stature of Elaine Badiou, or philosophers like Giorgio Agamben, or even a popularizer like Zizek, who also deal with literary criticism and literacy criticism in our ranks. I have come across many critics who are both sound in their foundation and write good criticism in India and Kerala in English, including Madan Gandhi first, Sunil Sharma, Madhumita Ghosh, Beena Bishwas, Niladri Chatterjee, Bharat Ravi Kumar, Kirti Sen Gupta, Anil Kumar Payapili, BJN, etc. But they either work at the level of being just explicators, analysts, elucidatory interpreters, or repeat what is already available to us in what earlier critics said or our traditions, which does not mean it is not precious, yet they do not so far take risks in branching out into the kind of world changing criticism that can be written or was by an Eliot or a Freud in his reading of Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, or brought about by schools and movements like Russian formalism, the Marxist critics, the Yale deconstructionists, feminist critics, etc. Yet, only the mentioned critic shows some element of risk taking, this despite India having many critics who have got Fulbright, etc. Maybe my knowledge is limited. However, my daring is not. I propose that to be a great critic, one does not have to go to UK or USA and can still write in English. Aurobindo serves as a good example. But what one needs is to understand and have the courage to speak of today's literature, yet not in isolation from anything in the past or from other genres, or in isolation from what other critics and theoreticians have said or of theories of today and the past. While speaking on the present scenario, what one has to concentrate on is not tradition and the individual talent anymore, or whether one's poems are a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions recollected in tranquility, or not, but something much deeper, which is the philosophical question of what criticism should do today. What has to undergo a sea change to make literary criticism and theory relevant for today is to take it out of the category called scientific research and bring it back on the streets and thoroughfares of the internet, which is exactly what I propose to do. What this means in practice is that one is not writing on literature, meta-literature, or literary criticism or theory to be prescribed as an adjunct to the textbook. Some unfortunate student is studying something somewhere in India, cursing his head off as it appears in his reading list, but instead writing as intelligent inquiry, asking again the questions one has to ask about the books we read. The simple ones that still hold true, like do we like it? So, if so, why? If not, why not? And starting from there to go deeper into the gray areas, like what is it about? Does it not contradict itself? Sometimes are there patches of weakness and not just excellence in it? What does it refer to? What is its ideology? What is its style, etc.? In Gita Narayanan's research project on pedagogy, Project Vision, that I had the good fortune to teach in once when I taught Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. The students were asked to look at text, self as a reader, world, author, and context by me to understand it. It was amazing how much came forth. What I mean can be illustrated by the fact that reading in India is still not taken as a topic on which critics are tested as to whether they know how to read in the fuller meaning of the word today, or whether they have had any training in critical thinking. We may, for instance, never have heard sometimes that reading now means acquiring and learning literacies, many of which are new unless we have heard of James Paul G. But once we have heard of his work, it is no longer possible to write literary criticism theory in the older manner. I cannot explain this in the short space of this lecture, but hope to exemplify what I mean in the coming columns in the most exciting manner, which is to ask what happens to works written nowadays if looked at it in the light of modern critical theories or new literacies, or as part of a rigorous critical thinking exercise, or in reading done using tools of discourse analysis. These tools could be Indian, ancient, Western, or anything else that is handy, since we are no longer limited by anything in 2015. But the exciting part is applying them to new writing today, not from off the presses, irrespective of whether one is burning one's fingers in the process or not. Let me take a very brief example for pleasure to make the article is little interesting. We have the following line in famous poem by William Wordsworth: I wandered lonely as a cloud. I wandered lonely as a cloud. The line goes, oft when on my couch I lie. We know that the word couch was taken on a different meaning in the 20th century after the arrival of the psychiatrist's couch post-Freud. Now, the question here as a reader is such an impure reading being foisted chronologically on the poem, if done well, meaning intelligibly or sensibly or even amusingly justified or justifiable? The answer is, since the advent of postmodernism. Why not? Since we read connecting what we read to ourselves and the world around us now and today, why not impure readings? I read a reading of Rukhaya M.K. of Forest's The Road Not Taken, and in that she says, uh, he took no road whatsoever but the middle path. An impure reading in terms of overlooking a line in the text or taking it to mean something entirely different from what it means in its context or according to the author. The question is, faced with such a reading, what should one do? Can one call it a less relevant reading? No, but one can examine the tools used for reading, which takes one back to the question of who trained someone to read and how. Yet here we are still in the shallows, the depths being whether Indian English critics can match our counterparts in the West by producing more than a handful of significant figures who have written books worth their while that can compare with works like Edward Said's Orientalism, for instance. That too written from home turf or from places that are not considered famous centers of learning, the way a Fanon could come up from Algeria. I feel it is possible, and the time is now ripe for such masterpieces to emerge from younger critics with greater potential and better insight than I have. A short prologue of history of criticism is to be given at the beginning. At that point, the sign of the world literary criticism, alongside the beginning and advancement of literary criticism, must be inspected. There are numerous manners by which criticism might be grouped. There are some major critical hypotheses. For example, mimetic, down to business, expressive, and objective. One regular polarity for criticism is Aristotelian versus non-romantic. Aristotelian criticism infers or legal, intelligent, and formal criticism that will in general discover the estimations of a work there inside the work itself, or indistinguishably connected to the work, whereas Platonic criticism infers a moralistic, utilitarian perspectives on workmanship, where the estimations of a work are to be found in the convenience of craftsmanship for other and non-artistic purposes. Further, the grouping of criticism is finished by the reason that it is expected to serve, for example, to legitimize, to portray, to translate, to pass judgment, to find different literary and its pertinent viewpoints. Like Indian literature in English, the term Indian literary criticism likewise needs explanation. It would be in the manner practical to characterize the importance and extent of Indian literary criticism before we continue further. One regularly comprehended significance of Indian criticism is that it is control of assessing the structure and status of particular works inside a tradition of writing. In his book, The Adventure of Criticism, K.R. Srinivas Iyengar cites the meaning of criticism from a well-known word reference as criticism is the art or demonstration of evaluating the nature of literary or artistic work by examination of its benefits and deformities. Iyengar further states T.S. Eliot, who says criticism could dependably declare an end in view, which generally gives off an impression of being the clarification of works of art and the remedy of taste. A general meaning of literary criticism is that it is control of assessing the structure and status of particular works inside a tradition of writing. As it were, it is the way toward gathering points of reference, recognizing or legitimizing them as standards or benchmarks of execution, and estimating by these standards the work close by. The gauges by which a critic estimates a work of art are not in every case fundamentally and simply literary. They are adapted and controlled by his social legacy and the literary tradition to which he has a place. On the off chance that this is what is associated with procedure of criticism, at the point literary criticism in India ought to be established in her past culture and philosophy, and its local characteristics ought to reflect accentuations of Indian philosophy and feel in the entire procedure. However, the Western effect on the Indian personality has made it incomprehensible for any Indian critic today to work inside the antiquated Sanskrit tradition of criticism alone. An Indian critic is, in this way, compelled to incorporate his very old tradition with the Western tradition. We live in the time of criticism, when literary and critical theory have turned into part of the scholastic order. Literary criticism currently offers such a dumbfounding assortment of theory and practice that it is practically hard to discover an exit plan. Rene Valek says, the present age might be genuinely viewed as the time of criticism. The gigantic learning work that occurred particularly in the initial three many years of the present century and the resulting opening up of new skylines in different departments of learning prompted the advancement of various critical hypotheses, patterns, developments, approaches, ideas, schools. For example, Marxist criticism, psychoanalytic criticism, the Russian formalism or organistic formalism, myth and archetypal criticism, linguistic and stylistic criticism, new criticism, Chicago school, Bakhtinism, structuralist and post-structuralist criticism, deconstruction, feminist criticism, reader response criticism, nativism, semiotics, cultural materialism, lesbian, gay criticism, essentialism, genre criticism, eco-criticism, liberal humanism, contextualism, eschatology, narratology, modernism, and postmodernism. Lesbian, gay, contextualism, eschatology, and postmodernism, multiculturalism, realism, neorealism, and different types of postmodernist isms. Numerous critics in 20th century are spooky by the inquiry, is there no closer as far as possible of isms? Is there one ism that will never observe an end? Certainly not. While examining these different patterns in literary criticism, Rajnath watches these patterns in the West have their disparities, their responses and counter responses, yet in the Indian setting they may seem alike as they have been commonly acknowledged as new molds in criticism. Indian critics have reacted in different approaches toward the Western advancements from new criticism, reception aesthetics, and phenomenological criticism. Existentialist poetics and different sorts of hermeneutics and Marxist criticism to feminist, post-structuralist, post-modernist, and post-colonial hypothesizing through the methodologies of retention, adjustment, expansion, correlation, abstraction, and nullification, while Indian English critics, with not very many exemptions, have been amazing copies of their Western counterparts, driven as they are by the weights of the telling worldwide critical talk, which they expect themselves to be partners. Maybe one should recognize the critical ventures being made as part of a simply scholastic interest is situated frequently towards vocation, advance, and the genuine endeavors at perusing, rehashing, decontextualizing, and scrutinizing Indian writings, patterns, and traditions, generally done in Indian dialects and on occasion in English. The Indian English literary critical tradition takes its introduction to the world from a specific bilingual sensibility that commanded the Indian literary critical scene after the appearance of the British. The 18th century was the Renaissance time for the development and advancement of such a tradition. The main products of this bilingual sensibility were conveyed by the preachers themselves, for the most part British, utilized in the administration of the East India Company as interpretations into English of Indian sacred writings and other sacrosanct writings. This likewise included verifiable and religious records of India. Etymologically, the word criticism is gotten off from Greek word signifying judgment. It is an exercise in judgment. Literary criticism is the activity of judgment on works of literature, to inspect the excellences and deformity, lastly to assess the artistic worth is worth is the capacity of criticism. It isn't as straightforward as it shows up in light of the fact that we have a large group of clashing perspectives, hypotheses, and definitions. Reason for such a decent variety draw out the multifaceted nature of criticism. Critics differ in their frame of mind, scholarly preoccupation, biases, and inclinations. A critic with religious convictions and a lot of moral qualities will hold a view steady with his sorry with his stylish appreciation. Theory of criticism is likewise firmly associated with the theory of poetry. This thusly is associated with the soul of the age, the scholarly and moral condition in which an artist live will have impact on their disposition and character. Subsequently, we see an adjustment in criticism vis-a-vis improvement, social and conduct sciences, mental, sociologic, monetary musings, bringing out new way to deal with criticism. Marxism offered assent to Marxist theory of literary criticism. Existentialism after World War II represents existential criticism. Literary criticism is the play of psyche on the work of literature and imposing inquiries and noting them. The reason for existing is better understanding and valuation for the joy. Request causes us contemplate literature. Along these lines is a development theory of literature. Criticism is the investigation of forming and expressing right judgment upon the esteem and value of works of literature. It is just through criticism that scholarly thankfulness and clear understanding winds up conceivable. M.K. Nayak holds a one kind of position among the critics of the 20th century. He was a standout amongst the most extraordinary scholarly people of his age, and he had a present for clear, intense, and well-suited articulation. He was additionally and exceptionally flexible essayist. For his critical work, he decided on numerous types of literature. He was famous in them all. He started a critic of impressive guarantee, however, later formed into a splendid author, and captivating writer. He was additionally an unobtrusive and all around educated and critic regarding literature. He applied extraordinary effect on his counterparts through his discussion and writing. Nayak was an incredibly decent talker. Literary criticism in English literature. The investigation, study, and assessment of individual works of art or literature, just as the plan of general methodological or tasteful standards for the examination of such works, is called as literary criticism. From the most punctual long periods of literary history, criticism has been a noteworthy part of literary theory and practice. A retrogressive look over the historical backdrop of criticism in the light of numerous speculation is valuable. The mimetic theory is normal for the criticism of the old style age, with Aristotle as its extraordinary expounder. Horace presented the possibility of guidance with delight, and the impact upon the group of spectators in the center was vital to his perspective on art. From Horace through the majority of the 18th century, the dawn to business theory was predominant, in spite of the fact that the neoclassic critics resuscitated a genuine enthusiasm for impersonation. In the meantime, the facts demonstrate that criticism through the 18th century was unequivocally certain of the imitative idea of art. While the beginnings of sentimentalism came the expressive theory, it might be said the most normal for the sentimental frames of mind. At the point when Wordsworth calls poetry the unconstrained flood of incredible inclination, the artist has moved to the inside. Presently, the poet's creative mind is another power on the planet and a wellspring of a remarkable learning and articulation is the genuine capacity of art, starting in the 19th century and getting to be predominant in the 20th, has been the ballad, essentially composed exclusively for the poem's purpose, as Poe communicated it. Structure, examples of symbolism and images turned into the focal point of the critics for the work of art is seen as a different universe, but that as it may, expanding enthusiasm for brain research has kept the contemporary critic additionally mindful of the way that the crowd capacities in the work of art and perspective on the legend ebb or flow today will in general and take the artist back to a focal position, and in the meantime to an incentive regarding the group of spectators reality. The artist talks through his or her prototype examples and pictures from the racial obviousness. These perspectives on criticism will enable us to outline history of the criticism. Literary criticism in writing of M.K. Nayak, a standpoint amongst the most prominent endowments of English instruction to India is composition fiction. For however, India was likely the wellspring head of narrating the novel, as we probably am aware. The structure today was an importation from the West. Fiction was to be the most well-known literary mode of articulation today for Indo-Anglian scholars. Books have been and are being distributed in 12 Indian dialects and furthermore in English, and the corresponding impact between the novel in English and the novel in the provincial dialects have been preferably progressively personal and purposive over such impact in the fields of poetry or drama. Also, this has obviously been encouraged by the similar case with which a novel as unmistakable from poetry or drama can be made an interpretation of starting with one then onto the next of numerous dialects current in the nation. As Nayak's commitment is more prominent, the specialist might want to approach by making the divisions of his work with the goal that the best possible consideration would be given and nothing remains out inconspicuous. The critical articles are distributed in the national and universal recognized diaries. Nayak appears to have taken a great deal of torments again to distribute these as books. For example, dimensions of Indian English literature, studies in Indian English literature, and so on. About H. Hatter is a troublesome book which does not loan itself effectively to translation, chiefly in such a case that the art of the epic artist is one of purposeful enhancement. Hatter's art seems, by all accounts, to be one of conscious perplexity. He himself admits that his self-portraying is written in a language intentionally intended to beguile the larger part and teach them to start speculating and deciphering our genuine float and moral story. What the heck we mean? Desani's unrealistic life. In this way, the novel is a very perplexing in topic and method. The epic is pursued and translated on various dimensions. It is with a moment's delay the comic personal history of an Eurasian unconventional, the account of his genuine mission for understanding the significance of life, a social annual uncovering parts of wide Eurasian and Indian character. Nayak's critical sense could be seen in various features of his writings. At times, the titles are perplexing and convincing, and now and then the articles opened with the literary citations. This time, we have Aristotle's citation, "Man as a political creature." This fits the 19th and 20th century man outstandingly. Let he tosses a surge of light on the advancement of the political books written in different dialects of the world. Indians have been writing refrains in English for over a century and a half. What's more, it is just genuine that endeavors have been produced using time to choose the best out of the ballads composed during these years and to distribute them as collections. Nayak has accomplished incredible acclaim through the moving and significant workmanship. And finally, dear students, we have, I will conclude by using the lines I'm going to speak. Indian English literature thrives through the commitments and manifestations of such huge numbers of stalwarts including increasingly more in shifted structures like novel, poetry, story, exposition, drama, and so on. So, um, uh, his Naik's introduction with each reference painstakingly commented on can go about as a helpful manual for any scientist who needs to catch up his examinations, be that as it may, he appears his intelligence delicately. So, dear students, today I have finished my lecture and we shall meet again tomorrow